Hello and welcome to the Aerospace Testing International podcast. This month I met Nichola and Will Benton to chat about the ATI Boeing Accelerator, an industry initiative that helps startups in the aerospace sector. The accelerator is run by Boeing and the UK's Aerospace Technology Institute, but it is by no means a UK-only programme. It attracts companies from all over the world. At the end of March, the accelerator released details about its second cohort of companies, and the programme really does seem to be gathering momentum. Although we only discuss a few during this 30-minute talk, there really is a diverse range of startups, from companies developing algae-based biofuels to radiation detection technology and advanced first aid kits for airline stewards and stewardesses. Startups on the accelerator get help with funding, networking and mentoring after submitting a pitch. And as you'll hear, I try my best not to compare the accelerator to Dragon's Den, but ultimately fail because the concept is a bit like Dragon's Den. Anyway, listen on and I hope you enjoy the podcast. Nick, do you want to tell me first what you do at the ATI Boeing Accelerator and a little bit about what it is?
Sure. So I work for the Boeing company in our CVC, HorizonX. So I'm the Boeing lead for the ATI Boeing Accelerator, which is our UK-based accelerator program. And it's really about how can we help support the growth of the UK aerospace ecosystem. Okay.
And Will, what do you do, please?
So I'm Venture and Ecosystem Director on the ATI Boeing Accelerator program team. So we are contracted to the ATI for designing and delivering the program itself. And I work with Nick, our other sponsors and partners at GKN Aerospace, Rolls-Royce, and then obviously the ATI, and then with the 10 startups that we have on the cohort at the moment.
Great. So thank you. So for the benefit of those people that don't know quite yet what the ATI Boeing Accelerator is exactly, could someone run through exactly what it is and what its aims are and what it's achieved so far?
Yeah, sure. I can take that one. So ATI Boeing Accelerator, as Nick said, is a early stage business support program designed to match startup created innovation with the industrial need. Are two sponsors and one partner. So Boeing, our primary sponsor and investor into the cohort. Mm-hmm. And then we also have GKN Aerospace and then Rolls-Royce as a program partner. And we work with all three businesses, the ATI and then the wider aerospace ecosystem pre-program to figure out what industrial needs exist. And then from there, create themes for each program that we then go and scout startups against. So this cohort, for example, is sustainability themed. And then within that sustainability theme, we have three sub-themes, Industry 4, energy, and sustainability and kind of short-term COVID response. So we then go out and scout startups against those thematic areas and then spend 12 weeks working with the startups and industry to get everyone connected, working together, and then going off and doing exciting things after the end of the 12 weeks.
Okay. The ATI being the Aerospace Technology Institute, the UK
Indeed.
government research kind of agency, right?
Yeah, so civilian aerospace trade body, I guess, and grant funder. So they sit on top of 150 million sterling annually in grant funding for small scale SME and then scale up businesses looking to develop services and products applicable to the civilian aerospace sector. So we are the earliest stage in that grant funding program. So Boeing invests 100,000 sterling into each of the companies on the cohort. And then from there, the companies can transition into the grant funding schemes that the ATI run.
So it's a bit like Dragon's Den. I know it's a very overused cliche, but Dragon's Den for aerospace, or?
Yeah, what would you say, Nick?
I don't know. I mean, we end up with hundreds of applications, Ben. You know, that's the reality. We do end up with hundreds of applications, and we don't just take them from the UK. We actually take those applications from right across the globe. Mm-hmm. And then what we do is filter those down. And the filter isn't, you know, just on the which company is the best company, that because it's never as simple as that. but we're also looking at, from a Boeing perspective, from a GKN perspective, and from a Rolls-Royce perspective, which of these companies do we think that we can implement right now? Or which of these companies do we think we can add the most value to today?
Okay.
So that's the other challenge, as well as then, the underlying piece, obviously, from my perspective, is this a good venture investment? Are we going to make a financial return on investing in this company?
So it's about picking out the promising technologies and companies behind them and nurturing them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, so that model of working and that kind of collaboration between industry and government through ATI. I mean, what inspired that? I mean, it's quite innovative in a way in the aerospace industry.
Yeah, so I think that it is and it isn't, and that there's lots of these sorts of programs. I think what's really key in this is actually the private sector investment. So where we have Boeing actually has skin in the game with these companies. We provide that investment so that we're not only working with them through that 12-week window, but they're part of our portfolio. They're part of the Boeing family, here on in. So it's in our interests to ensure that these companies are really successful going forward. And that partnership with government, allows us to have that real focus here on building that ecosystem in the UK, which is really key, in terms of the long-term growth for the aerospace ecosystem and ensuring that these innovators do come through. In the UK, we're really great at innovation. Where we're not so great is in the commercialization. Mm-hmm. So how do we actually take that innovation through and make these companies really successful long-term businesses? Mm-hmm. And that's what is really important to us at the ATI Boeing Accelerator. Okay, great. That's really interesting. Thanks. I'd just like to ask what's the actual mechanics of how it works from the point of view of a startup company then? I mean, could you explain that to me?
Yeah, sure. So we have a 6 to 8 week application window where a company fills out a written application. That's then the first down select after that is then matching that application against the selection criteria. If that passes, we then go into interview process, and we then have another down select, and we end up interviewing between 20 and 30 companies for the 10 places for each cohort. Mm-hmm. Once we got to the final 10 pre-program, we spend a bit of time with all of the sponsors and partners identifying the champions within each respective business. So working very closely with Nick and the Boeing company on finding which business unit and which leader within that business unit would be the champion for each respective business, so that by the time the company comes in of the 12, we've already got that internal staff lead on commercial dialogue, be that kind of champion internally to help the company build those commercial relationships with each business over the course of 12 weeks. And then we build a curriculum that's unique to each cohort. So it's not a kind of plug-in repeat program. It's actually structured based on the needs of each individual member of the cohort. And that's anything from workshops, mentoring, investor one-to-ones, corporate introductions, and that progresses over the 12 weeks. And then while we're doing the program itself, we're also kind of strengthening those commercial relationships with the program partners and sponsors, but also bringing in other ecosystem members who aren't part of the official kind of program stakeholder group. And then we're approaching the end of the second cohort. At the moment, we're very much in kind of investment mode with the 10 companies. So helping them connect with investors, start talking to investors about raising the follow-on investment post-program. And then at the end of this 12 weeks, we step away and the companies go into kind of full-scale fundraising mode for the companies that are fundraising, and progressing from there.
Great. So it's really like giving them that leg up into starting and operating as a company. Right. Okay, I understand. So we've mentioned these thematic areas a few times. So the way I understand, each cohort will address a different thematic area, right? So what have you done so far, and what's coming up in those areas?
So in our first cohort, we did Industry 4 technologies. So looking at everything and we try to keep a very wide scope, because the other thing that you've got to remember is if we go out and say we want these 3 specific things, that we're actually closing a lot of doors to things that we haven't actually thought about yet. So we try to keep those fairly high level. So the Industry 4 group, did look at factory type technologies, productivity technologies, but also additive manufacturing, all of those supply chain technology. So kind of everything that you could think that could encompass in the widest possible sense. And then, as Will mentioned, this current cohort is focused on sustainability. And again, in the widest possible sense, including COVID recovery. So again, another really wide batch. What we've got coming up in the UK, we haven't quite decided on the next theme yet. As you can imagine, the last year has been fairly turbulent. But what we are thinking is that we are going to try and open the gambit a little bit wider, so that we're bringing more defence technologies into the programme as well, thinking about those, particularly those dual use technologies. Because what we have seen, from a business perspective, businesses are just more resilient if they do civil, aerospace and defence. So that's really our thinking on that, and beginning to explore what would be the real sweet spot for it. The one kind of thing that I would say is that we do try to stay as close to software businesses as we can. And we're really not looking to build the next flying taxi through this accelerator. That's, those very capital intensive type businesses. It's just not possible to accelerate them in the same way through a 12-week window. So that's the only kind of caveat that we have.
But so I'll just pick you up on something there, Nichola. You mentioned, we're talking about the next cohort, but there seems to be a long-term commitment here to the accelerator. Can you tell me, how many years is everyone going to be involved in this for? It's until you get through all of the thematic areas, all the areas that you commit to, or?
To be quite honest, we really don't think about it in that way. This is, there's a couple of things obviously at play here. One is Boeing's commitment to the UK, which is forever. That's not a short term. That's not a short term commitment. We've been in the UK. We are a UK business. We pay tax in the UK. All of those great things. And the business is in the UK is really committed to growing its footprint. It is a high growth business and has been even through the pandemic. So from that perspective, Boeing is always going to have a strong commitment to the UK. In terms of the accelerator piece and global ecosystems, the UK ecosystem is pretty mature. So that will continue for as long as we feel that we're adding value. When it comes to the point where we think actually the UK doesn't really need us to do this anymore, that's probably the time that we say we'll now's the time for us to move on and go somewhere else that needs that ecosystem support more than the UK.
But it really is international. You don't have to be based in the UK to do this. No. So USA, Europe, everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, so the UK government have been absolutely fantastic on that front. They never put any quotas or requirements on us in terms of where the companies should come from. What they were looking for was benefit to the UK economy. So we have stories of some of the teams that we scouted internationally have now come and said, okay, actually I think I want to be located in the UK. This makes sense to me. So we've seen all of those benefits of that. But it is also worth noting that through the selection process, we did end up with a majority of UK companies. Okay. And I think that just speaks volumes for the level and quality of innovation that we actually have in the UK.
Okay, great. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about some specific examples of companies that have perhaps come through the first cohort or that are coming up in the second cohort. Are there any companies or technologies that that you think will have a large impact on aerospace, or you think are particularly promising that you could outline for me? Will or Nick?
Naming our favourite children. Yes, they're all great. They're all going to make an impact. I'll do a quick run through, and then maybe Nick, you can talk about Authentize and what those guys have done with you guys, especially. I think personally, from the latest cohort, it's one of the kind of most varied group of companies I've ever worked with on an accelerator program. So really, really exciting, broad range of capabilities and experience. One of the teams that I'm really excited about, if it works, and it's an if at the moment because it's still in the lab, is a company called FICO Bloom. That was set up by two PhDs from Cambridge and Oxford universities, so proper British engineering expertise. And they are developing a novel solution for growing biofuel from algae. But instead of the current setup where to harvest the fuel, you have to kill the algal crop, they're developing a new solution that involves just skimming it off the top of a test tube, for example, so that you don't kill the crop, and it's much more sustainable and efficient and environmentally friendly. And great team, huge amount of academic experience. And if the lab tests work, that's going to be a really exciting, very global business very quickly. We've got a couple of other energy companies in the cohort. So we've got HiRock, who are based up in Hull, doing new solutions for hydrogen flight, and lots of interesting things around fuel precursors before we get to having the ability to do lots of mainstream hydrogen stuff. And yeah, I mean, as I say, it's quite like being asked to choose your favorite child. They're all great. They're all wonderful. So Nick, over to you.
So the big successes that we've seen in the last year, for Boeing, in the out of cohort 1. So we had Authentize, who's in our additive manufacturing business. And no doubt in the last year, there are two really important things: can you make us money, or can you save us money? And the Authentize team firmly fell into the saved us money bucket. So they saved us millions of pounds in the last year. In fact, I think it was tens of millions. And also lots of actual hours. So that they saved us an absolute fortune. So that's been one of the really big successes in terms of actual deployment into the company. So they've done really well, and are going on to raise another round of investment, that we'll also support. And then we have the one that I think actually, and it's, again, as Will said, it's very hard to choose, and these come from the ones that you're actively talking to about a specific thing right now, is Circular. The Circular team have done an outstanding job in the last year. That their team has grown exponentially, their revenues have grown exponentially. And they have the potential, I think anyway, to really change aerospace. And what they're able to do is actually track where our raw materials are coming from right the way through our supply chain, and therefore also able to track what that carbon footprint is of that manufacturer right the way through the supply chain. That's a hugely powerful thing. And if we were able to, they've been very successful in the automotive sector already. So this was, how do we attract a company like that into aerospace? Because let's be honest, aerospace is hard to break into. The barrier to entry is pretty high. So that's the real challenge with that team, is how do we really embed them through aerospace, not just at Boeing. It needs to be all of us together. And I think that team can have a really transformational impact on the aerospace sector globally.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear about those. I mean, you've preempted one of my questions really about innovation in aerospace in the sector. I mean, why is it difficult to break into it in this way? I mean, do you think that we don't see enough innovation in aerospace? I mean, people often blame the sort of duopoly of which Boeing is part of one side of. I mean, is that should that be the end of the argument, or is that established fact? I mean, what could you talk around that, please?
So I think that absolutely, we have a responsibility to ensure that it's not us that's the problem, and I think that's what we're out here actively doing. So there's obviously a lot of innovation that goes on inside the company anyway. Mm-hmm. But I think that the difference that being able to break in some of these entrepreneurs into the company is that it gives us all a different perspective on the innovation when you're seeing it from someone completely outside. Why is it so hard? I think it's not necessarily that it's, yes, it's hard in the sense that aerospace is slow. It's a slow market. If you're a startup, you could go and sell to the financial services sector, 3 times over before you could sell to aerospace, because of just the nature of the business that we're in. Aircraft don't get, built in milliseconds. That's not how it works. And also, it's a safety critical sector. So, That's the other thing is we can't just throw innovation here, there, and everywhere. It has to go through the process. It has to be safe. We have to know exactly what we're dealing with here. So that takes time, and there is no shortcut to that. And then the other thing that I suppose to throw into the mix is the scale, and even just the scale of the Boeing company. I know that when I joined the company, and even now today, every week it's you discover a new part of the business, because it is just so huge. So that's the other part of it, and it is a really complex sector. The supply chains are complex. The products that we make are complex. The impact of those products is complex. So I think there's just a lot going on there. But I think that it's also one of those really key sectors. We've seen this year when aerospace and aviation, slows down significantly, the impact that has, even on, cargo, things that you don't ordinarily think about. The impact that it might have. So I think that that's really important to think about all of those things and just how huge it is. But I think that actually, there's an argument to be said that the duopoly helps, because there's two doors that you got to go knock on. So there's part of me that says that might make it a little bit easier.
But certainly a bit more complicated than just blaming it on Boeing and Airbus. Sure, I get that. Yeah, sure.
It's a huge sector with so much going on, and particularly, we've seen how the sector itself, is transforming. Looking at all of this eVTOL, coming through. That's going to make a massive difference too, to the overall balance of the sector.
Well, I think also? Oh, sorry, go on. I was just going to ask you, especially moving forward, as the industry moves forward over the next decade and further on than that, why innovation's important as well.
Well, I think just to add to Nick's point, yes, it's complicated. Yes, we're a very slow moving industry for good reason. But I think the counter to that is that we've very much demonstrated in the last 18 months it doesn't have to be. So it's taken us, I would say it's taken us the best part of 18 months to identify the internal stakeholders across the big aerospace businesses that we work with to speed that innovation process up. But using some of the companies from cohort 1, for example, we've shortened 3-year sales cycles to 12 weeks. So it is possible. You just need the navigation support more than anything, I think. And to answer your question on kind of where innovation fits, we as Nick was kind of saying earlier, the companies or the startups that we work with are developing kind of world-class, world-first answers to very challenging problems that are not necessarily always business critical from top down for a big company like Boeing or GKN Aerospace. So we're solving very, very, very important challenges, but doing that with a 1 or 2 person business rather than with a 150,000 person business. So the pace that our startups can move at, I'll wait for the phone to finish.
It's not important.
It's not. The pace that our startups can move at is significantly faster than what we've seen bigger, kind of more established businesses can move at internally. So I think it's the need for that innovation is always going to be there. And I think as we get more complicated into sustainability, for example, the reliance of big business working with smaller business is going to improve and increase. And I think the biggest kind of learning for me is just the speed and the expertise that you get in a startup business because of the nature of the lack of resource that you have. So every decision you make has to be for the benefit of will we survive or will we die? You can't get that in established industry. So if the industry is going to progress, move forward in a better, more innovative way, you need that kind of middle meeting between the two sides.
Okay, great, thanks. Just one last question for me, really. I'm just interested, if I'm an engineer out there who's perhaps got an idea in, to do with manufacturing or testing and inspection or sustainability or anything to do with aerospace, really, is there any kind of pointers or advice you give them? I mean, how would you get started? I mean, are you looking for any particular type of firm? Nicole, Will, is just to kind of finish up?
Yeah, so I think that, so my advice would be just do it, just go. Am I looking for any type of firm? What I'm looking for is, entrepreneurs or founders that are really passionate about what they do. The best companies usually come out of personal problems, something that they've worked on that has irritated them. And the other thing that I'm looking for is diversity. Please, 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 if you are a middle-aged white man, go and find the co-founder who is diverse to give you that different perspective, because the difference that it makes in terms of the survival of a startup business is significant. So, you need more perspective than just your own. And I think that's going to be really key. And the more that we can get more of that we can get into aerospace right across the board, not just from an innovation perspective, the much stronger aerospace will be for it.
Mm. But you've been pleased with the response so far from the industry and the sector. There's been a lot of interest, and what sort of feedback have you been getting, guys?
But we've been overwhelmed in terms of the interest that we've had, the quality that we've had in terms of applications is way more than we thought we would get the first time. When you do your first call, you think that this will be a tough year and it'll get better. It wasn't that at all, and we had a really difficult time down selecting. And then I think as well, the other thing that we haven't really talked about much here today is the collaboration with industry. That's been fantastic. Not just from GKN and roles supporting this program, but actually us looking at joint projects between either two of us within that group or three of us within the group, to work with an early stage company, and that might be us helping GKN understand how we have been able to shorten our procurement cycles for these teams, or how we've been able to do our due diligence in a much quicker fashion. Or it might be us both jointly taking a startup that we've seen and working on a specific area that's a problem for both of us, and us working with them together, or using GKN as the supplier in a supply chain technology to help us both learn something from that. And I think that's what's really important here, is that this accelerator was never set up to be the Boeing show. This was very much about how do we get industry to come together, to help us all get better, all learn, and get that innovation pulled through for the benefit of the whole of the industry.
Okay, great. So opening some doors as well. Well, sorry, I interrupted you then. You got anything more?
No, I was just going to say, to answer your question in terms of where people can go, the program team and I run, I think it's bi-weekly at the moment, but it'll increase in frequency once this cohort finishes, open office hours. So if anyone has anything entrepreneurial related that they want to talk to someone about, not necessarily aerospace, because none of the program team are from the aerospace industry, go to the program website, ATI-BoeingAccelerator.com, and book in for a 20-minute chat with one of the program team. We're also very active online, so you can look at us on LinkedIn, Twitter, etc., etc., and always happy to help.
Okay, great. Well, that's all. That's satisfied my curiosity about the program. And have you got anything left to add, guys, or have we covered everything? So I'm sure you'll agree it's great to hear about such positive action being taken to encourage innovation in the aerospace sector. I also suspect some of the companies going through the accelerator are going to go on to bigger and better things. I urge you to check out the accelerator's website for more information. Next month we're returning to the topic of alternative propulsion systems for aircraft, so subscribe to make sure you don't miss that. Thanks for listening.